I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And today we're going to talk about a novel that I wrote called Voodoo Child Slight Return, which is named after a famous Jimi Hendrix song. Perhaps you'd like to read a sort of quick outline of the contents
Here we go.
of the novel. One quick outline coming up.
A light-hearted thriller that entwines the story of Jimi Hendrix with Cherokee mythology. Ooh. Reclusive ad man, Big, has a vision of the now mature Jimi Hendrix. The charismatic musician propels Big into a cult who believes they are the lost Cherokee Canasta tribe. Is that how you say it?
I think it is. I'm not particularly familiar with the Cherokee language, so we apologise if Canasta, which is also a card game, by the way, is mispronounced in any way. So, that's
So,
quick summary.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask some questions. What inspired you to write Voodoo Child Slight Return?
It's very strange. 10 years after I left Scientology, I had my first and only counselling session. I met Margaret Singer, who was a professor at Berkeley and a wonderful person. And I met her in the spring of 1993, and I realised that this was somebody I could actually sit down and talk with that I trusted. I'm
good in a therapist.
Yeah, I'm kind of sceptical of most therapy systems. I really am. Having endured one for a long time. And so I arranged. I knew I was going back to California 6 months later, and I arranged to spend. Ended up being about four hours with her, talking. And when I sat down, there was, her approach to counselling was very much like my own. That you say to somebody, well, what seems to be the problem? Get them to tell you. And when they start, going back to the beginning of the story and telling you that again, you say, what do you think you could do about that? Mm-hmm. And they'll then offer you sort of 5 things they could do about it, 3 of which are a bit crazy, 1 of which would get them put in prison, and 1 of which is vaguely sensible. So you just encourage that, and you're done. And she did exactly the same thing. And the weird thing was that the first thing I said to her, and nothing was prepared, no questions, I hadn't thought about it, was when I was 15, I saw Jimi Hendrix at the Isle of Wight. And 18 days later, he was dead. And it really distressed me. And somehow that stuck. That was in 1993. And 4 years later, down to the incredible generosity of my brother Jamie, Jim, and his wife Janet, I was able to take the time to write this novel, and concentrate fully on doing that after years and years of standing up to the onslaught of Scientology harassment. I was liberated.
What about the Cherokee element in it?
Jimi Hendrix was an 8th Cherokee, so actually could claim to be a member of the tribe. An 8th blood means you can claim membership. He didn't. But he remembered his Cherokee grandma, and she taught him various things, including a rhythm, which he used for a song called "I Don't Live Today," which goes dum dum dabba dum 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 da dum dum dabba dum 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 da, which he had learned from his granny. There are lots of things that people don't know about him, but the Cherokee, people often know about that, and I think that was an important influence. It's worth saying that the guy from whom the blues comes, really, Charlie Patton, who's the first recorded blues guitar player. There were people before him, but he was in fact mainly Native American, not mainly black. And when you see pictures of him, his skin is well, he looks like a Native American. Yeah. He doesn't look like a black man. So Jimmy had part of that in him.
Yeah. Character. Well, would you read us a passage?
Oh, I don't know.
That'd be nice.
It's asking rather a lot, isn't it?
I know, getting you to read
from my own work. Now, it's a novel, and it goes along like novels do. People talk. There's a lot of activity.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely an adventure going on.
Yeah, and it's a sort of vaguely gothic thriller, I suppose, really. And hopefully it's funny at times too. One reviewer said it was terrifying, which I'd never, there are parts of, because it deals with magic and things like that.
Yeah. I think you do get that with the scan of it and the use of language. I mean, to me, it didn't really seem that way, but I do get how somebody could interpret it that way.
And it was a fellow novelist who wrote the review, so
yeah,
I didn't notice. But there are 4 short pieces within it, which are kind of purple prose, as it's called. And this one is called Standing at the Crossroads, a rant in 4/4. Anything you can say about God will not be true. Meister Eckhart, who was a Christian mystic who lived somewhere between 1260 and 1328. Anything you can say about God will not be true. Harsh winds gust and howl, and the wild dogs yelp and growl. Lightning scours the moonless midnight crossroads, blazing fierce, unforgiving light up to the edges of the world. And there he stands, isolated and alone. A black shape beckoning, trembling as he invokes the tremendous mystery that is the very heart of creation, of creativity. The bewildered silhouette gazes into the distant heavens, yet inwardly stares fixedly forever down, down, down into the darkest of the depths, much further than the heavens, to the very focus of the soul. This crux, where all but a brief scattering of years must be sacrificed for the imbuing spirit of the blues to gain entry and grant mastery. This axis, the crossroads at the precise centre of the world, where the bluesman seals with life-blood his unbreachable contract and lets go his fate, like a tiny exhausted songbird hurled into the thundering tumult. From this sacred cruciform the devil's music shall be released upon an ever-willing world, in payment for the devil's tender coin, a short life spilled recklessly at the exhilarated heights, fame and adulation, devotion and adoration, easy money and easier loving. Held high by the captivated crowd, held high in a cloud of potions ancient and modern, chided and derided by every clacking Puritan tongue. The whooping winds shake and rattle the black, scraping bones of winter trees. Beneath the lash of the last fingers of leaf, the solitary figure shivers for the cold, and in chill anticipation of his pact. The devil, prince of Belial, Iblis, called also Satan, the opponent, an infrequent visitor to the Old Testament, where in the book of Isaiah, Jehovah proclaims, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Before his son's descent to earth, God paid little heed to the devil. From a slow start of many centuries, sweet Jesu's followers eventually gave this Satan rule above a court of a myriad evil angels. So in the slack water bayous and languid swamplands, the dreaming cypress groves and merciless cotton fields, along the rolling coils of the Mississippi and the deepest depths of the Deep South, the heartland and birthplace of the blues, exorcising preachers helve their bitter gospel, draw forth and condemn their legion of demons. In among this pack, every Vaudoan deity who might enthrall the supplicant, bent bowed at the crossways, pleading for revelation, devils of sloth and disorder, devils of derision and desertion, devils of art and artifice, those idling demons who deride the nobility of toil, loose-tongued blasphemous yammerers, yowling intemperate stammerers who infuse intoxication into the unrighteous, bright-lipped, doe-eyed Jezebels who fawn and fondle, flatter and betray, and her very self, queen of evil, the scarlet whore of lust and lewdness, vicious and lascivious, with her over-brimming cup of fornication. These the God-smitten minister would accuse, these he would sonorously annihilate, if his heady words and vehement wishes could but hold venom enough. Another fervent gust blasts brisk hailstones against the crossing place. The meagre figure clutches the night close, because the night is all he has left. The night and his guitar. Not quite full-grown, unwitting of consequence, the worshipful servant consumed by the dire majesty of the blues, quaking beneath the great mass of the holy tree that towers above the storm-blown, stone-ridden dreck of this febrile, fractured wasteland. Every species of nymph, every muse, every saint and benefactor, and each most holy Messiah, the gods and goddesses, the prophets and visionaries of every non-Christian culture, all now throng the devil's court in his holy commandments. Among his few words directly spoken to the faithful, the Lord Jehovah flatly accepts the existence of other deities. If there is no other, how could there be any other God before him? And an unthinking Christian lovingly casts them all from Venus Aphrodite to little Johnny the Conqueror into the fiery pit, whether they be spirit of light or darkness, sprite of hope or strife. The Christian offers the crucifix blade and condemns each one to misery eternal. Jehovah's mother wife, Asherah, Astaroth, and his brother son, Baal, Beelzebub, fell early victims of this assiduous crusade to eliminate dissent in the great flock of orthodoxy, to clamp lightless tight the blinkers of belief, kill the kindly mother, and exalt the war god's son. Each crossroads offers and avails a turning point. Straight ahead to death's horizon is perpetual routine and traditional ritual on the well-trod path of habit, but turn to either sinister or dexter, for perhaps escape to grand exotic adventure or mayhap helpless devastation in the swamps and quagmires that underlie the grinning salesman's shining mirage. Each crossroads is a place of decision and perhaps of radical departure. Here, for the power to transcend the humanly possible, to thrill and captivate the souls of all who must listen, the bluesman spends his own immortal soul. This gypsy soul, which spurns the dull constraints of mind-binding convention, for the true bluesman shapes and makes a new self in his every single singing note, refusing the constriction of dead men's moralities, their tired mores and preening moralizing. The bluesman delves a deeper pattern of determination, self-decision, and honest disobedience, a free spirit capable of keeping his integrity even at the howling pyre. Because of his sure, convicted certainty that he will at the last fly free, like laughter in the smoke, this eager anarchist, unconvinced by the rich man's special pleading for his own godliness or his smug acceptance of his own dominance, the bluesman who believes entirely in the ultimate right of inspiration to overthrow the divine right of power. Who is this lonely figure at the crossroads? Can any narrative contain him? He shakes and shivers, scrapes his threadbare jacket to his meagre ribcage in despair of this world's cruelty and unforgiving coldness. He clutches his guitar paramour, robed only in rough sackcloth, the fretboard cosseted in a tight embrace to keep her precious from the scouring, skewering rain. This wretched, ragged figure, an outcast, the all-time loser, unsheltered from the raging, ravening storm, exactly here, at the pit of humiliation. An apparition, conjured by superstition to slam a reverent chill into the still, not true enough believer, a phantom or phantasmagoria, to charm the light-minded. This mythical crossroads cannot exist in any physical geography, cannot truly occupy either place or time, unless it exists perpetually in each yet moving human heart and mind. Christ spurned the greedy, who soon stole his message, and in their opposition inflate the court of Satan, and see his servants lurking in every shadow of a terrifying world that may at any moment rob them of their power, but at every turn words deride this vain rejection. Our talk yet invokes pagan gods as planets, constellations, months and days, and genius remains the vulgar term for exceptional talent, the old Roman for the personal angel, inborn in every human and dwelling in each as tutelary intuition until death. Perhaps such a guide waits at a personal crossroads in everyone alive, and perhaps it is only the devil who holds us from this knowing, unless the Lord of all goodness truly wants his creatures to live in a grey wasteland, void of laughter, dance or song. Their stern and loving God, the greatest trick of all, breathes brimstone and burns love out of his every follower, and all he did was to change his name. Blessed are the meek, but they have graved God and worship power with their bullying insistence at our obedience. Their attempt to slide the money changers into every sanctuary, and the presence that their cold, hard currency is vital for breath of life itself. They overawe us and nail us shut with rules and dead lettering, rather than offering us the gushing sacrament of living life. Stand sanctimonious at the door of heaven to keep it slam shut. Perhaps it really is the bullish, domineering devil who has persuaded almost everyone that he is God, while loving kindness can do no more than wait patient and ever hopeful in the shadows. So it is. The bluesman sacrifices himself for the good of all who must listen. Perhaps the true taste of music is the ecstasy of the divine, music which is the only ecstasy incapable of debauch, a preaching without words that touches the heart and loins to quell and quiet the agonies of the slave-driver's devil-hide whip. A huge silence rends the livid wall of indigo, then the whole of the air booms in symphonic crescendo. Twin snakes entwine in mimic of the lightning flash of revelation. The last leaves cascade from the world tree, and from its tip a garnet-eyed eagle catches the sky. The bluesman drops caterwauling to his knees, shielding thunderclapped eardrums, and in the magisterial blackness of this overwhelming annunciation, the Lord of Music appears to lift up his most humble servant before him. Cool, that was long.
That's great. Remind me of the concept of, what's it called? The Eternal Now? Something like that.
Yeah, my sideline is mysticism. While many people who've helped former cult members are either strict, non-magical thinking atheists or followers of some traditional belief. I stand at neither side of that divide. I'm an agnostic, and I'm fascinated by the mystical writings, so the writings of Buddha, Lao Tzu, Zhang Tzu, and I, throughout my life, admired the positive teachings of Jesus, the positive teachings of Muhammad and the Sufis. So I dig into all of that, and I can't remember what your question was anymore. What was your question?
It's about the Eternal Now.
The Eternal Now. So we'll get there. In looking at 20th century mystics like Joseph Campbell or Matthieu Eliade, they talk about this concept of the perpetual present, that if there is eternity, you're in it now. And I accepted that as an idea a long time ago, a couple of decades ago, way back. And it reassures me and gives me comfort that we are always...
We're here.
Yeah, and that time is a strange and odd phenomenon that, as Einstein pointed out, is actually space-time.
Which is very confusing.
So there is a fundamental idea, and that is the crossroads. And we're always at the crossroads.
And the person standing at the crossroads is everyone. Is that... Yeah,
we're all of us, all of the time standing at the crossroads because we can make a decision to change something. So, for example, the character that is used for Tao, the way, is basically of a path. It's a point at the crossroads where you can make a decision, and it doesn't matter what's happening unless you're on the point of death. You can change your mind. You can make a decision, and the crossroads story, of course, is often told of Robert Johnson. It's complete nonsense, and I do engage in that in the book. The story was in fact first told about Charlie Patton's pupil, Tommy Johnson. So there's a confusion of names there. Robert Johnson sings that he went down to the crossroads and he fell down on his knees.
Pray to the Lord
ask
above.
the Lord above for
Mercy.
mercy. Help me if you please. So he's not the Tommy Johnson story, which he loved to tell, and he's become attached to Robert Johnson. They were not related. The Tommy Johnson story was that he took his guitar to the crossroads at midnight, and he handed it to the devil, who tuned it. And when it came back to him, he could play the blues. It becomes attached to Robert Johnson because Robert Johnson, as a kid, hung around with Tommy Johnson and Charlie Patton, and indeed Howlin' Wolf was part of that little group on the plantation. And he always picked up their guitars and tried to play them, and he couldn't play them. And then he went away, and there are various stories about how long that was for, a year or something. And he came back, and he was a brilliant guitar player, still copied by, Eric Clapton made an album imitating Robert Johnson. Peter Green made an whole album imitating Robert Johnson, and his songs, Cream, had a massive following playing Johnson songs, including the rather obscure From Four Until Late, which has the line, "A woman is like a dresser, some man is always running through its drawers." Such poetry. And Rambling on My Mind, which has been a Clapton standard for many years. So yes, the Eternal Now, the Crossroads,
And Genius Within Everybody.
Genius Within Everybody. That I have never met anybody who didn't have something to teach me, and that includes people who are considered mentally defective by others. I've learned by talking with Down syndrome people, because they have an experience of life that is unique and personal. I've also never met anybody who was without talent. I've met a tremendous amount of people who've been dissuaded from using their talent, been put down and discouraged. I'm kind of for Joseph Campbell's notion of follow your bliss. This is your life. This is the eternal now. You're not living to go to heaven later. You're not living to create the socialist paradise for your children. You're living now. So it's not what you're going to get delivered from Amazon tomorrow that's important. It's that you inhabit the moment now and do your best with it. Take the correct turn at the crossroads if you can. But that means to say, what is it that I really love? What is it I really want to do? If you have that privilege, of course, half the people in the world don't. They are struggling to eat. They're struggling to survive.
They're forced in their action.
Yeah. But once you've got past the point of having enough coming in, and again, my thanks to my brother Jim and his wife Janet for their incredible generosity in that regard. When there's enough coming in, you can focus on what your talents are and what you can do well. And that may be baking cakes. It may be, laying out a garden,
knitting,
and one of the beautiful things I've seen in my life was I was in a bank in Los Angeles, and they had Amish quilts hung, and they were beautiful. But it's, so it's finding that, it's moving towards that, and I think that many people in this world are miserable. Joseph Campbell told a story that he overheard in the diner a young lad saying that he didn't want to drink his orange juice, and his father said to him, "I've never done anything I wanted to do. Drink your orange juice." And that is a tragedy. That is a tragedy. I come to a very positive conclusion, I must say, about human life. I don't feel in the least bit negative about who we are and what we are. I think, as Muhammad said, we can be so good that we are like angels, and we can be so bad that we are beasts. And many people have used his teaching to act like beasts, unfortunately.
What research did you do?
I had 2 years to write this novel, which was incredible. And I read every book I could get on Hendrix. I think there were about 14 biographies of Hendrix that I read. I got every disc I could. So I listened to a tremendous amount of live Hendrix and really immersed myself in it. And I should say, I'm not a kind of Hendrix freak in that I'm about 200 artists and composers that I have the same level of devotion for, Sibelius and Stravinsky, or the polyphonic composers of the Renaissance.
Or even just like Joe Cocker, you've got.
Joe Cocker, Buddy Guy, the blues artist, Rory Gallagher. So, I just feel incredibly lucky that I have such an intense response to music. And it's been, a saving thing in my life. I've played the drums since I was 15, which is now very nearly 50 years. And I've played in bands, as you know, when I was, until I was about 19. So I played a couple of hundred gigs probably.
I mean, one of the things I really liked about it is the list of music that turns up in the book. I found my way to listen to every piece that you mention, and it's just really great. Really.
And the chapter titles, of course, are all the names of Hendrix songs or lines from Hendrix.
Yes,
which was
One Rainy Day. Is that
a Rainy Day Wish? Rainy Day Wish.
Yeah.
Moon Turn the Tides gently away, and just everything.
Red Hat.
So part of it was reading about his life and finding out all sorts of things that are not common knowledge. So, for example, most people don't know that the reason they weren't able to send him to Vietnam was that he'd already been in the military. He was in the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, and he discovered that he hated parachute jumping.
Got a sound from it, though.
Yeah, the sound, the free fall sound, I think you'll find when he's making those wailing noises in Hear My Train A-Coming, Love a Man, Machine Gun, that those are the sounds the kind of heavenly ethereal sounds that people report from free fall. But he didn't like it. But so, he was a paratrooper. And indeed, he's regarded as kind of the epitome of hippiedom. But he was never a hippie. And he, for all the hippies cut off all their hair, I don't care, as he said. In fact, there's an interview in 1967 where he's asked about the Vietnam War. And he says, well, somebody's got to stop the yellow peril, which is not really a very hippie sort of thought. He came to absolutely change his mind about that. But he's a curious figure because he is a black man in a white world. And he's, the curiosity is that he is one of the founders of British blues rock because he couldn't find any success as a band leader in the US. He was working, his band was called Jimmy James and the Blue Flames when Linda Keith, who was Keith Richards, the Rolling Stones' girlfriend, first saw him and went, wow! And she took Andrew Loog Oldham along to a gig, who was the manager of the Rolling Stones. And he said, yeah, well, I don't know. And then she took another manager or agent along. He was, oh, yeah, whatever. And she'd nicked one of Keith Richards' Stratocasters for him to play. And finally, Chas Chandler, who was the bass player of a band called The Animals, who I think had about a dozen top 20 hits, Chandler had realised there was no money in doing what he was doing. He was working really hard. And they're a great band as well, The Animals. They were wonderful. They're largely remembered for House of the Rising Sun, but we've got to get out of this place. And there's so many great songs. And great musicians, Eric Burdon singing and Alan Price playing keyboards, wonderful player. But Chandler decided he wanted to set up some kind of management company. And he decided that he wanted somebody to record this folk song, Hey Joe. And he went to see Hendrix, and Hendrix played it. Whether Linda Keith had found this out, suggested, I don't know. And he said, I want you to come to England. And Hendrix said, no. And then Hendrix said, do you know Eric Clapton? And Chas Chandler said, yes, I do, actually. He said, if you promise you'll introduce me to Eric Clapton, I'll come to England. And then he comes to England at the very end of September 1966, changes his name on the plane from Jimmy Jimmy to Jimmy Jimi. So he creates this new character. And on, I think it's October the 2nd, finds himself playing on stage with Cream, with Eric Clapton. And Ginger Baker's tried to say, "Oh, I'm not having him on the stage. Who is this guy?" And eventually, because Chandler was a very big guy, so one of the few people who wasn't scared of Ginger Baker, I'd be scared of him. He's dead. Right. Chandler basically said, so Baker said, "Well, look, as long as Eric stays on stage, I guess it'll be okay." This, I think, was Cream's second gig. Mm-hmm. And Eric Clapton, in fact, came off the stage shaking so badly he couldn't light his cigarette because Hendrix just started playing Killing Floor, which is a Howlin' Wolf song stolen by Led Zeppelin and called the Lemon Song. And Clapton said he'd been trying to work it out and hadn't got it, and Hendrix was playing it double speed. So he scared the living daylights out of the whole community. And he remains, that he's the go-to electric guitarist. If you want to play classical guitar, you go and listen to Segovia, who, brought the form about, really. If you're going to listen to electric guitar, it doesn't matter what style you play. You go to Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. So the research was into his life and his music, but also into the Cherokee. I read a lot of Cherokee myths and found out about the Canasta, these people who, according to the Cherokee, disappeared into the side of a mountain one day. And they live inside the mountain. And so I thought, well, what about a sort of cult group in the home counties of England, the counties around London, who are these middle-class people who believe they're a reincarnation of the Canasta. And that Jimi Hendrix appears age 60 whatever by this time, as he would have been at the time, which was actually 1999 when I finished it. 20 years ago. And it's 20 years ago today.
20 years ago.
Yeah, Jimi Hendrix taught the band to play. That he appears as a vision to this jaded advertising man who's made lots of money in the advertising boom and believes in nothing anymore, and directs him towards this group so that he can have an influence upon them. And as you say, then it's an adventure story. It's a gothic thriller. The long piece that I just read out, there are 4 of those interspersed in the book, the purple passages, but the rest written in English. The other thing was reading about the blues. I spent that 2 years reading about the blues, and I also read about voodoo voodooing, because Hendrix, voodoo child, he often refers to voodooing. He carried a talisman with him at all times, in his shoe. Didn't know that, did you? He's referring to, I read Maya Deren's Divine Horseman, which is a brilliant book. Maya Deren was, I think she had a doctoral degree. She was a choreographer, very famous in the 40s and 50s, I think. And she went to study dance in Haiti and became involved in voodoo. And I think it was Joe Campbell who asked her to write a book about it. And it puts aside all of the zombie myths and all of this kind of thing. You see somebody of tremendous intellect understanding what is underneath this. And what fascinated me was the notion of the Loa, who are the, if you like, the deities or the saints, angels of Vodun. Each of them is associated with a Catholic saint, so that they were able to carry on their religion while in slavery by pretending that it was this. But it then became, it then did take on aspects of Christian faith. And the Loa, basically a person at a ceremony will be mounted, thusly divine horsemen, will be mounted by a Loa, and they will act in a particular way. If it's Baron Samadhi or whoever they'll be chain smoking because that's characteristic of the person. What interested me is that Hendrix was a very shy person off stage, and until the later years. You see him in interviews later on, but early on he's very apprehensive, very shy, and then he goes on stage and he becomes this other person, performing tricks which are not original to him, playing the guitar between his legs, behind his back with his teeth. These are things that Charlie Patton and T-Bone Walker had done long before. There's a tradition of this incredible showmanship, which probably goes back to minstrelsy in the 19th century. which was the most popular form of entertainment in America for decades. So he became the ultimate performer, but he is as if possessed. He's taken over by the spirit of music. Saint Cecilia, if you want to get Catholic about it. Yeah. Paul Simon refers to a couple of times the patron saint of music. So yeah, many strands of research. I was fascinated by the Cherokee myths, so they're woven into the book.
Yeah.
And there's a search for the Ulan Suti, which is this magical crystal which they find.
Yes.
And you know, it's. I was also very powerfully influenced by the English playwright Dennis Potter. Potter had written Pennies from Heaven and The Singing Detective, and in both of these, and not only those actually, but Lipstick on Your Collar, he takes songs and they're suddenly performed by a group of doctors or what have you. Potter never makes it clear whether what he's showing you is a magical event or something in the mind of the person. And it's shocked me towards the end of Potter's life. I saw an interview with him where he actually said he was a Christian, an Anglican Christian, because I thought that he wasn't.
I got that impression.
Yeah, but he's highly intellectual, highly intelligent. But that sort of dimension of, well, where is Jimi Hendrix coming from? Is he just in Big's mind? Is he a real presence?
Yeah, where is it? Didn't you say it also had something to do with the movie Play It Again, Sam?
It does, that Woody Allen's Play It Again, Sam, in which Humphrey Bogart comes along and gives advice. Well, that's the way that Hendrix...
And you don't know.
relates to Big and guides him through. And for me, the thing is that there is a twist at the end, which you haven't quite got to yet. Where, well, I'll tell you what it is. Spoiler. No, non-spoiler alert. That the purpose for Hendrix to do this is not what you would think necessarily. And you find out at the very end of the book why, the spirit or imaginary character of Hendrix would be involved. And you'll find that out.
Yeah.
Oh. Is there anything else on your list?
No, not really.
So that's it. Voodoo Child, slight return, available from all good booksellers. Whoa, it's been a long one.
Yeah, but good.
Yep. And thank you very much for sharing your time with us and your patience in hearing me out. And I hope you'll go and buy the book. I hope you'll enjoy it. And, give us some comments and some likes and press the little bell that means that we're reminded to be harassed by us. And I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And thank you for your company.